This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello there, welcome to Global Business Africa. In the course of the hour, we'll run through all the business news stories you need to know about from across Africa and beyond. But first, let's start with a quick run through the markets here for you. Now, I'm going to be talking about the latest set of results coming through from the Kenyan carrier, Kenya Airways, but it's also worth looking at the context, especially as far as its share price is concerned. Closing about 0.4% higher, but remember, it's down 70% this year alone to barely 2 US cents. For comparison, the NSE 20, the benchmark index, it's down 12.7%. The carrier, however, did move 150,000 more passengers year on year, and revenues were 12% higher as well. So what exactly happened? We'll explain that in a moment. Here's what's coming up tonight. Uganda Airlines is back in the skies after an 18-year break. Kenya Airways reports increased losses. We'll be looking at the latest numbers. And Ghana's fantasy coffins are attracting art collectors. All that and plenty more is in the pipeline for you tonight. But let's start in the business of aviation tonight. Uganda's national carrier, Uganda Airlines, is back in business after nearly 2 decades on the sidelines. Now, the airline made its first flight to the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, earlier on Tuesday from Entebbe International Airport. The flag carrier is also set to make another flight to Somalia, Tanzania, Burundi and South Sudan. With the details, here's CGTN's Isabel Nakiria.
After a long absence, Uganda Airlines is back off the ground. The inaugural flight to Nairobi had government officials and journalists on board.
We shall straight away go for intercontinental flights to a few high-volume destinations of travelers to and from Uganda. There has never been a better time to commence commercial operations than now, when passenger traffic is growing, given the increasing demand for Uganda tourism.
And President Yoweri Museveni calls the airline a symbol of national pride. After 18 years, Uganda's national carrier is flying again with the first flight to Nairobi's Jomo Kenyatta International Airport. The airline says this will be the most busy route. Fares on the Entebbe-Nairobi route have been among the most expensive in the region, with the ticket going for as high as $600. Uganda Airlines will be having promotional flights, with some fares dropping to around $200. The government says travel throughout the region will become simpler.
With Uganda Airlines, our friends all over the world can now enjoy uninterrupted service across the region. Flying in the region is going to be much easier, better, and I believe more comfortable.
Uganda Airlines was grounded nearly 2 decades ago over financial mismanagement. The government hopes the airline will be more financially secure once oil revenues begin to flow into the country. But competition is also expected from regional airlines like Kenya and Uganda Airways, which fly the same routes.
Take the bull by the horns and make sure that this airline is successful. Government will give you all the support that you need because it is a national airline.
The country has ordered 2 more Bombardier aircrafts to arrive later this year. 2 Airbus jetliners have also been purchased. The government hopes the revival of the airline will facilitate trade and promote tourism in the region. Isabel Nakiria, CGTN, Entebbe.
Kenya Airways had reported a loss that is more than double what it reported last year for the half year to June 2019. Now, the company is in the red to the tune of $83 million. While announcing its results for the last fiscal year, the carrier said its first half revenues were up 12% from a year earlier to $566 million. The airline attributes the growth to the launch of new routes and more frequent flights. However, the airline's operating costs also went up, in part, management says, due to two Boeing 787s that had been subleased to Oman Air coming back during the first half of the year. According to the carrier, investments in new routes, such as those going to New York, to Mauritius, to Libreville and to Mogadishu, also delivered a 6.6 increase in passenger numbers during the period to hit 2.4 million. Now, the airline is being renationalized, remember, in order to save it from its crushing debt load. Over in West Africa, Nigeria says it's not ready to renounce assets despite a court ruling that allowed Process and Industrial Developments, or PID Limited, the right to attempt to seize some $9 billion from Nigeria's government. Now, the ruling comes in the wake of a dispute over a $9 billion gas project with a company that's registered in the British Virgin Islands. It's one of the largest financial penalties imposed on Nigeria. In fact, it's actually equal to about 20% of its foreign currency reserves. The country's information minister, Lai Mohammed, told journalists in Abuja, the country's federal capital, that the country will not relinquish any assets. On the other side of the continent, in Sudan, thousands of families are considering how to return to their lives after devastating floods. 2 months of heavy rain has forced them into temporary accommodation. At least 62 people have died and around 100 others have been injured as a result of these floods.
Heavy rainfall has caused severe damage in Sudan. 17 of Sudan's 18 provinces were affected and at least 35,750 houses inundated. The worst hit areas are White Nile, Sinar, El Fashir and north of Khartoum.
The area of Wad Ramli depends solely on agriculture, but now there is nothing. There is a need for second homes because otherwise where are we going to live? We urgently need NGOs, the government or anyone else to provide us with shelter because we have young children. Some of them are under 10 or 12 years old. We urgently need shelter because winter is coming and it's going to be a problem for them.
Volunteers and aid workers responded quickly when the savage floods hit. But not all villagers were fortunate. Officials say around 200,000 Sudanese have been affected. Residents living in makeshift tents are bracing themselves for water levels to keep rising.
The rise of the Nile level happens every year, but this year the damages are too much in the area. This time we're asking for urgent help from the government, especially for housing. It's very important for all these people so they can have somewhere to live. Being in the camp is not convenient because there will be many sicknesses caused by the water.
The crisis comes as Sudan ushers in a political transition to civilian rule. On Friday, the newly appointed Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok visited Wad Ramli, which is one of the affected areas, and gave directives to intensify aid efforts. Chom Hono, CGTN.
Right, then I run through some corporate headlines now. A court in Oklahoma has fined Johnson & Johnson $572 million for fueling an opioid epidemic in the United States by deceptively marketing those painkillers. The U.S. pharmaceutical giant has appealed against this landmark ruling. The fine is expected to go towards care for a generation of addicts, families and communities affected by the crisis. Johnson & Johnson is the first pharmaceutical company that has been tried over the U.S. opioid crisis. Elsewhere, the Mozambican government has formally launched an exchange offer for its defaulted 2023 Eurobond. Mozambique is seeking the consent of bondholders, at least 75% of them, for a restructuring that will ease the pressure on its strained public finances. Mozambique said in May it had agreed to a restructuring deal in principle with a majority of the holders of the dollar-denominated note, one of the instruments at the center of a hidden debt scandal that triggered a collapse in its currency. Also, South Africa's Standard Bank has taken a stake in a local fintech firm, Nomanini. Africa's biggest bank by assets has invested $4 million in a firm which connects informal merchants with distributors through an e-wallet arrangement. They aim to roll out the service across some 14 African countries by early 2021. Now, the partnership will offer credit to potentially millions of retailers across Africa with limited access to banking services. And finally, a bit of an obituary here for you. The German auto industry power broker Ferdinand Piëch and a long-time patriarch of Volkswagen has died. Reports say that Piëch, who was of course a key engineer of Volkswagen's takeover of Porsche, died on Sunday unexpectedly. Piëch was a grandson of Ferdinand Porsche, who founded the company that bears his name and designed the first version of VW's signature Beetle. He was an auto industry mainstay for more than 4 decades. That's a run through your company headlines. It's time for a short break. You're watching Global Business Africa. Here's what's coming up next. We'll be taking a look at the problem of financial fraud in Kenya when we come back. And a look at China's Beijing Automotive Industry Corporation's plant in South Africa. All that and more is in the pipeline.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business. Only on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
But beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Sudan. Hello, Naro.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference. Welcome back to the program. Now, fraud is an enormous problem that's facing Kenya's financial sector today. In the country's banking sector, for example, a lot of fraud is perpetrated through falsified payments that include computer fraud, card fraud, pretty much anything you can name under the sun. Now, when it comes to digital lending, identity theft is a huge concern as well. As part of PricewaterhouseCoopers' biannual Global Economic Crime Survey, 75% of the respondents from all sectors in Kenya indicated that it had suffered some kind of economic crime. So then we've identified the problem. Let's see if we can actually fix the issue and see what solutions are on the table. Kamal Konye is the regional head for East Africa at Credit Info. He's live in studio with me tonight. Welcome to the program.
Thank you, Rama.
So let's start perhaps by quantifying the problem, because we know that there's nearly 600 million different mobile e-commerce transactions taking place in this market. That's worth roughly $17 billion. But how prevalent is the problem of fraud?
I mean, like you said in your intro, from the survey that was done, it is quite huge, considering that the mobile gadget has become the transaction instrument of the day-to-day. Mm-hmm. So it obviously becomes a target for fraudulent people to actually attack. An easy way to take advantage of people who are not aware of what is happening. And when they say 75% of the people they asked have actually encountered some fraud of the other. I mean, it's known. You get the SMSs that tells you that, you know, please send this funds for this to this number from some unknown number, and people actually tend to fall for these scams. So it's quite big. In terms of actual value, I can't really put a value to it, but the fact of the matter is that it is prevalent in the market, and more people are actually encountering one fraud or the other.
There's a consumer behavior question related to that, because like the example you gave, right? Those ordinary scams where we say, oh, you know, your child has had a problem in school, we're taking him to the doctor, please send money to this number. I mean, these are things that have been around for a while. I mean, ideally by now, rationally, we should have known how to deal with these problems, but we still see these scams running around all the time.
They keep changing, and they keep these scams keep changing. There are those that they will still fall for all those old scams. So it's a kind of trial and error. But however, that said, there are more and more sophisticated frauds that we're beginning to see using the mobile gadget, especially when it comes around to mobile lending apps, where people are actually stealing individuals' identity through the SIM swap, where they're able to swap a SIM card and a number from your current number, and then be able to actually use that to transact and get facilities from other mobile apps.
Let me link two ideas here together. Identity theft on one hand, because one of the things that are part of the daily Kenyan experience is you walk into a building, for instance, like when you came in here, you had to leave some form of identification at the door. And that's common pretty much right across the board. To what extent has the fact that there's so much data, personally identifiable information out there, to what extent has that made it a lot easier for people to engage in fraud of this sort?
I mean, yeah, that's the whole thing. As long as you've got an ID and you've got a number and you've got a mobile phone, when you have those three things put together, it means you can almost do anything with that. Obviously, the best way to prevent that or to scale it down is to have more face-to-face KYC processes. However, in the digital age that you're in, that is becoming more and more difficult to do.
In fact, if you tell me to come to see you face to face, I'll tell you why.
It's really rare. I mean, I can do it online.
Yeah.
So it's becoming the easiest way for people to actually, should I say, find a way of actually go through the identity theft process, so they know that I just need to be able to find an ID. Hopefully that ID is a good ID, and get a number. And maybe if the guy doesn't get to find out that I'm using it, I'll be able to get access to a number of different facilities of a mobile app.
Which is disturbing in so many ways. But okay, that's the problem. But at the same time, we're highly dependent on a lot of these gadgets. I don't walk around with cash anymore because mobile money is so convenient. But the solutions you're offering would provide a real-time link to credit reference bureaus, but you also mentioned third-party data sources.
So we are a credit reference bureau. So there are two kinds of data sources you have. You've got your regulated entities, like your banks that actually submit data to the bureau. Okay, so let's say the lenders who send data to the bureau. Then you've got third-party data providers as well. So you've got your IPRS, for example, which is your national ID database. You've got Safaricom with a recent solution, IMSI, which is also available. So those would be third-party data sources that would be able to tap into to try and minimize the identity or any fraud transaction that's being done on a mobile.
Are you able to tap into utilities as well? Water companies, electricity bills of that sort?
Currently, no, we're not. And if you think about it...
Is that a legal issue or is it an operational issue?
It's neither. I mean, if you think about it, what you're beginning to see more and more that's happening in the market is those are becoming more prepaid services. So it's just, top up an M-Pesa and then load that. So it's no longer an account linked to,
to a specific individual.
Exactly. So
with an obligation to actually pay that comes later on.
Yeah, so that doesn't. And, again, in Kenya, we've had this thing that for very many people that for power, it's one account under the landlord and the landlord distributes the bills to you to pay.
Which actually so in terms of visibility, it doesn't
do much to actually help with that visibility.
All right, Kamal, I'd love to continue this conversation, but we're running out of time. Thank you for your time here this evening.
Thank you very much.
All right then, so that's a question on fraud. Let's focus a little bit on the telecommunications market in Kenya. A deal that aims to turn Kenya's cellular service market into a duopoly is on hold tonight at the request of the country's Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. Now, the agency is probing events about 7 years ago when the Kenyan government's stake in the firm was diluted to 40% after it chose not to put in extra debt into the firm. At the time, Treasury only converted the long-term debt it's already provided to the company into equity. A year later, France Telecom bought 11% of the firm, which it did not own at the time, raising its stake to 60%. 4 years later, France Telecom cashed out. It sold its 60% stake to the private equity firm Helios. Now, Telecom has just under 8% of the subscriber market share. By combining most of its business in a joint venture with Airtel, it will raise its market share to 34%. Safaricom, however, is still the biggest player in the market. 62% of the subscribers are on its network. Earlier on, I spoke to the CEO of Telecom Kenya, Mugo Kibati. I started by asking him why a deal agreed to 7 years ago has temporarily stalled the formation of the Airtel Telecom joint venture.
I'm at a loss to see the connection between an investigation into a transaction 7 years ago with business today. In any case, having seen that particular set of recommendations, I see no remedy. First of all, no remedy should they find any culpability, and I doubt there is none, because I've also reviewed the situation as to what happened during the restructuring. I see nothing wrong having happened. I think it was just basically a simple dilution between dilution between two shareholders where one issued debt and one did not. It's typical, it happens in businesses, and maybe some people don't understand that. No problem, they can investigate it. I don't think there'll be anything wrong, but in any case, even if there was to be a problem, which I doubt, there's no remedy, legal or constitutional, that would have an impact on the ongoing transaction.
Right, so going back to the joint venture, so what's a final shareholding of that going to look like, and what are the relative strengths that you're bringing to the party?
So the final shareholding really is simple. It will primarily be aligned to the revenues contributed by both entities. And roughly speaking, we contribute about a third. I mean, Telcom is about a half the size of Airtel in terms of revenues. So kind of a 2-to-1 split. So that is why we've said in our announcement that we roughly expect about 30% plus or minus, because the final shareholding will depend on the relative revenues at the point of closing the deal. The last 12 months at the point of closing the deal. So until we close the deal and we're able to make that determination, we can't give you an exact figure, but it wouldn't move too far away from around the 30% to 70% range, between Telcom being the minority and Airtel being the majority shareholder, with an option for Telcom to beef up its shareholding to 49% for a cash consideration. But if that was to happen, that won't be immediate. That would be down the road. It's not being considered at this point in time.
It's one thing to say, okay, now we've put these two entities together, but as you said, there's a competition problem in the market. A big chunk of revenues are heading over to one player. Looking at Airtel's books, have been bleeding money for years. So once this combined entity is in the market, comes into play, will we really have cured that competition problem?
I think the point we're trying to make is that, first of all, beyond making a point, both companies, Telcom as well as Airtel, have adjudged it to be unviable to continue as they are today. And this is a point that we have made over many years, that we have a failed market structure where there is a dominance by one particular player, and that dominance has starved the sector from further investment, whether it be by the existing small players or by new investors. At the point of Helios coming in some 3 years ago, the predecessors, Orange, had spent a long time, 2 years, looking for a suitor. Nobody was interested in coming into this market for the reasons that, because of the failed market structure. So this transaction will not cure. However, it basically allows for the existence of a player who is stronger than either of the existing number 2 and number 3 players.
Just to loop back to the point you made, Orange spent time looking for a partner. Helios comes in, looks at the business and says, well, we'll buy 60% of this. But as you point out, there's still a competition problem. Yes. So why sink in those billions into buying 60% of Telcom if there is a competition problem that's not been solved?
I think we're talking about today. That was an assessment that was made 3 years ago. There are assumptions that were made, obviously, about regulatory reform that never took place, right? I think one would have been incredulous to believe that we would come to this point in time where we have one player who is responsible for 105% of the profits in this particular sector. 105% is basically above 100%. And so I think those assumptions were made 3 years ago do not pertain today, right? And I'm talking about today. As we stand today, even with regulatory reform, the two entities found it necessary. I mean, even if it was to happen, we'd still need to merge the businesses that we're merging. But that will not be sufficient without further regulatory reform, just because of the dominance of the main player.
Now, Kenya has formally joined the League of Oil Exporting Nations, albeit at a relatively small amount at the moment. President Uhuru Kenyatta flagged off the state's first consignment, 200,000 barrels of crude off the port of Mombasa. The oil is being shipped to Chinese state-owned firm ChemChina, which won the tender earlier this month. It paid about $12 million for the cargo. Now, the move is part of an experimental phase being carried out by the Kenyan government before it begins production and exportation at scale in 2024. The East African economy's journey to becoming an oil exporter started way back in 2012. This comes after the oil and gas explorer Tullow Oil discovered commercial oil reserves in Kenya's northwest region of Lokichar.
Indeed, ladies and gentlemen, I'm proud to say Kenya's grand march to oil and gas production and export has now begun. The flagging off of this maiden consignment represents a new dawn, not just for Kenya, but also for our region, and the beginning of a new era of greater prosperity for all Kenyans. This greater prosperity must, however, be jealously protected. And in this regard, I wish to underscore the government's unshakable commitment to sustainable development. We will ensure that Kenya's natural resources are utilized in a manner that yields maximum dividends today, but without compromising the interests of future generations.
Now, the Beijing Automotive Industry Corporation, BEIC as it's more commonly known, is one of China's 5 large car makers, and it set up a production line in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa at the Kruger Spatial Economic Zone. The facility will be fully operational by the end of the year, and it's expected that some 50,000 vehicles will be rolling off the line once it's running at full tilt. The company has a joint venture with the South African funder, the Industrial Development Corporation. Here's CGTN's Angela Coppola with the latest.
The Fortune 500 company launched their third vehicle to motoring journalists in August in Johannesburg. The B40 Plus is a four-wheel drive vehicle, and there are plans to produce more passenger vehicles, sport utility vehicles, light commercial vehicles and trucks for the local and export markets.
BEIJING is an enterprise that emphasizes integrity, attaches importance to sincerity, has strength and seeks innovation with the most open attitudes and thinking. BEIJING will make unremitting efforts for the mutual benefit and win-win trade and economic cooperation of China and South Africa. BEIJING will make a greater contribution to initiate the Belt and Road program.
For the IDC, the investment opportunity made complete sense. BEIJING joins the other 7 big international auto brands that have production facilities in South Africa.
It's export opportunity for South Africa, earning foreign exchange, it's job creation, it's new capacity in the auto sector. We want to grow the auto sector to be more world competitive. So that's why we were very interested as IDC to co-invest with them.
One of the challenges facing the global market is adhering to the country's black economic empowerment rules, which is difficult to do for any of the original equipment manufacturers. It's in the component sector where the work will be done.
Around these OEMs, you've got the local component manufacturers set up, and that's massive. And that's where we want to see the BE happening, the black industrialists, the youth, the women-owned, and we're making huge inroads in that.
There are ambitious plans for the manufacturer, who is planning 50,000 vehicles in phase 1.
We want to go into the whole continent. We've got the free trade agreements, as you know now, so we want to export these vehicles, and then maybe we can move into a phase 2, where we can get to 100,000 vehicles per annum, which is the ultimate goal for us to get to.
South Africa is a place where BEIJING has placed high expectations and hopes. We're looking forward to playing a role in South Africa.
At 4.5 billion rand, this is the biggest single greenfields investment in the auto sector in the past 40 years, and it augurs well for that sector and for consumers who have more choice. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
It's 18:30 GMT. You're watching Global Business Africa. Time for a short break. Here's what's coming up next. The US President notes China's willingness to resume trade talks. And we'll be exploring why authorities in Paris are restricting large tour buses from the city centre.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Welcome back to the programme. Let's run through some of the stories making your headlines at this hour, starting in Libya. The country's eastern forces, also known as the Libyan National Army, now claim to have full control over Libya's entire airspace. Now, with that announcement, the forces led by General Khalifa Haftar say they're getting closer to ending their campaign for the capital, Tripoli. Analysts, however, believe that full airspace control in the divided nation is going to be pretty hard to maintain. Thousands of families are considering how to return to their normal lives after devastating floods in Sudan. 2 months of heavy rain has forced them into temporary accommodation. At least 62 people have died and around 100 others have been injured as a consequence of the floods. In the meantime, Kenya is urging the United Nations to list Al-Shabaab under the exact same sanctions designated for Al-Qaeda and ISIL, the Islamic State. But foreign aid donors are warning that this move would leave millions in drought-stricken parts of the country without aid at all. Nearly 18% of the Somali population faces the risk of severe hunger. The UN already does target Al-Shabaab under broader sanctions, but UN agencies and humanitarian organizations are exempt. Now, the exemption allows for them to safely deliver aid in territories controlled by Al-Shabaab. And finally, top security officials from across Africa are in Nigeria's capital for the first Nigeria Interpol week. They are focusing on collaborating to tackle major security challenges by exploring the Interpol framework in strengthening partnerships among national law enforcement agencies. As a run through your headlines. Right, then matters further afield now. The G7 summit was concluded on Monday with a one-page declaration. On the trade front, the G7 said it's committed to open and fair world trade. The meeting requested finance ministers to closely monitor the state of the global economy. The G7 also wishes to overhaul the World Trade Organization to improve its effectiveness with regard to intellectual property protection, settling disputes a lot faster, and eliminating unfair trade practices. The G7 is further committed to reaching an agreement in 2020 to simplify regulatory barriers and to modernize international taxation within the framework of the OECD. The US president says China is about to resume trade talks. His comments came after the G7 summit and followed Chinese Vice Premier Liu He's remarks that China is willing to resolve the trade dispute through talks. CGTN's Nathan King has this report.
2 days and 2 Trumps. On Friday, he was threatening to order US companies to leave China, tweeted that he was going to raise tariffs and even attacked his own central banker. But at the G7 this weekend, a change in tone, if not substance. Whether it was pressure from world leaders anxious over global economic downturns, pressure from US businesses and Wall Street, or just the latest twist in his made-for-TV and Twitter negotiating style, the US president was more positive.
He wants to see a deal made. He wants it to be made under calm conditions, using the word calm. I agree with him on that.
Trump seized on comments made by China's top negotiator, Vice Premier Liu He, who restated China's long-standing approach to the trade issue by saying, "We are willing to resolve the issue through consultations and cooperation in a calm attitude," and resolutely opposed the escalation of the trade war.
What are you favour of trade peace on the whole?
Trump's change in tone came when leader after leader, some publicly like the UK Prime Minister and some more privately like the French President, related their concerns that the trade war was a drag on global growth and threatening a recession in Europe and potentially the United States. The Trump administration also raised the possibility of talks here in Washington with the Chinese side sometime in September. Now, that has been reported before. If there's enough progress, both sides have said that is possible. But the fact that the Trump administration are flagging up now suggests that this is definitely a change in tone at the G7, if not entirely in policy. Nathan King, CGTN at the White House.
Costco, America's largest wholesale membership club, opened its first physical store in China on Tuesday. It's located in Shanghai and thousands of customers poured in on day one. But the question is, can Costco keep this beginner's luck, if you want to call it that, alive? Especially when most Chinese are not used to buying items in bulk. With this report, here's CGTN's Wule.
Costco Wholesale's first physical store in China opened its doors at 8 a.m. Tuesday in Shanghai's Minhang district. Thousands of Chinese consumers lined up to enter this American membership warehouse retailer.
This supermarket is so big and many say the prices are very cheap, so I got a membership card.
There are an innumerable amount of products here, ranging from fruit to meat, from water to nuts. I just bought these two iconic Costco products here. Interestingly, last week, American President Donald Trump asked enterprises to withdraw from the Chinese market. Now, America's largest warehouse club retailer has finally opened its doors after selling to Chinese customers online for the past 5 years. Costco arrives at a time when some international retail giants, including Amazon and Carrefour, are retreating from the Chinese market due to strong competition from local retailers. The trade war escalated last Friday as President Donald Trump increased existing and planned tariffs on a total of $550 billion in Chinese goods in response to new levies announced earlier that day by Beijing on $75 billion of U.S. imports. Imports like meat, coffee, and juice are most affected, and everyday consumers of these will likely bear the burden.
This U.S.-China trade war indeed worries us. If the prices are getting higher, we may buy fewer American imported goods.
With a growing number of Chinese middle-income families, foreign supermarkets and retailers, including Costco and Walmart, are battling to win over China's high-end consumers. But experts say Costco faces a very different market in China, where most city dwellers prefer shopping more frequently and haven't embraced bulk shopping habits.
If the service here is good, I will be willing to come here regardless of the prices.
As China says, it always welcomes foreign companies and investors. But the fortunes of these overseas retailers in China will largely depend on their strategies in adapting to local consumer preferences. Wu Lei, CGTN, Shanghai.
Now, China is a massive market, population of 1.4 billion people, but at the same time, it's also relatively complex. Many foreign supermarkets have entered China, but some have retreated because they've had a really hard time making any money. CGTN's Zhao Yun takes a look at how some retailers are doing in China.
Many have come and some have also left. China is a vast market filled with opportunities, but for some multinational retailers, it has been difficult for them to operate profitably. For instance, Britain's Tesco left in 2013, and in June this year, French retailer Carrefour sold 80% of its equity interest in its local unit to Chinese retailer Suning for around 5 billion yuan. That's around $700 million after several years of losses. But there are also foreign retailers that have not only survived, but also thrived in China. German supermarket chain Aldi opened its first 2 locations in China in early June, and 20 years since it entered the Chinese market, Walmart has expanded its footprint tremendously. By the end of last year, Walmart had opened more than 400 stores, including over 20 Sam's Clubs across the country. And one of the secrets behind the boom is the big adjustments they made to cater to the Chinese shoppers' tastes.
We explored the preferences and tastes of ordinary Chinese consumers and then adjusted our SKUs from 20,000 to 30,000. We even offer deep-fried dough sticks in the morning. In our store alone, we could sell 25 to 30,000 in one day.
When you're in Rome, do as the Romans do. Or in other words, when you're in China, you have to try hard to meet the needs of the Chinese consumers. Insiders say that those supermarkets will not only face competition from multinational chains, but also homegrown chains, including Alibaba's Hema stores, which offer a hybrid of online and offline shopping. Experts also say that with e-commerce becoming a major driving force in consumption growth, retailers have to integrate online and offline channels to meet full potential in this digital era. So, CGTN, Beijing.
Now, until recently, residential property seemed to have escaped the waves of change that have transformed so many industries. Consider the hotel sector and Airbnb, for instance. But now the home rental market is starting to go through a revolution in the United States as more youngsters embrace the industry.
Data shows on average, youngsters in the U.S. move 12 times before settling down and buying a home. Jay from New Hampshire is one of them. He has moved 6 times for the 9 years in New York. Annoyed by dealing with big furniture every time he moves, he set up a furniture subscription service, Feather.
Part of why I started this company was I realized that the American dream has changed. And so previous generations cared much more about acquiring homes and cars and that proverbial white picket fence, and instead care more about new generations, millennials, Gen Z, etc., care more about achieving freedom and flexibility in their lives.
Traditional furniture rental services have limits on rental time, usually 6 months to 3 years. Feather no such limits. Customers can change or stop services at any time. Feather is also responsible for cleaning and maintaining of the furniture. Customers subscribe furniture by paying monthly fees. They can also end up buying the furniture, and the rent will be deducted from the selling price.
It'd really be nice to have quality furniture over a shorter amount of time than something that you're going to have to bring in yourself, assemble yourself, and then try to get rid of in X amount of months.
Apart from Feather, there are also platforms like Mobley to provide shared furniture. These platforms satisfy the need of young people prone to change their furniture every once in a while.
The urban living generation, which lives in rental housing, has many careers throughout their life, is really ill-served by the system, and they're stuck in this never-ending cycle of buying, throwing away, and moving furniture.
According to statistics from U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, 9.7 million tons of furniture fills U.S. landfills each year, the equivalent of every person in America tossing one couch every year. The situation gets worse after the popularity of fast furniture. Youngsters choose to rent or share furniture that will do good to the environment too. Song Yangtian, CGTN.
Now, the French capital is the 3rd most visited city on the planet. 50 million tourists made the trip over there last year. But Paris has had enough of some kinds of tourism, especially on large groups and tour buses running around the city. And now they want to restrict them from the centre. CGTN's Elena Casas filed this report from the French capital.
The City of Love is on every traveller's bucket list, but Parisians haven't always been the best at welcoming them.
They are not so service-oriented, so sometimes even they are quite rude, you know. So far it's not so. It hasn't been so comfortable when you are in a restaurant or those kind of things.
We were trying to ask where to go, what way to go,
no one would have anything to do with us. They wouldn't help out. All they did was speak French, and we tried to say we were English and didn't understand, and they weren't helpful at all. They were very rude.
We're finding them fantastic. We're staying in a lovely hotel. When we arrived yesterday, they couldn't have been more helpful. We came into Montmartre yesterday, went to a couple of places for coffee. Everyone was lovely, really friendly.
Now it's the mayor's office accused of being unwelcoming, following a crackdown on Airbnb with a law limiting short-term lets to 120 nights a year. It's tour buses that are in City Hall's sites. There are 4 hop-on, hop-off tour bus companies like this operating in Paris at the moment, taking tens of thousands of tourists every year. But City Hall says they clog the traffic, pollute the air and use too many parking spaces. They want to encourage tourists to use public transport, walk or cycle instead. Showing tourists the sights from a double-decker is set to get tougher. Bus companies have until September the 10th to prove their fleet will be using 100% clean energy by 2024, or they'll lose their licence to operate. The new rules also cut the numbers allowed to 36 buses per firm, something the companies say is unfair.
Our clients, like a lot of tourists in Paris, are older, not young people going partying. And these older people, or those with reduced mobility, can't use public transport. So you have to realise this is a need tourists have everywhere, and it would be illogical if one of our most touristed cities in the world didn't have this popular service.
According to the city's own figures, only 8% of visitors went on any organised tour last year, so a crackdown on buses shouldn't hit Paris's $23.8 billion in annual earnings from tourism too hard. Guides say they're particularly popular with certain nationalities, like the Chinese, but with or without the double-deckers, the City of Light is likely to keep drawing the crowds. Elena Casas, CGTN, Paris.
Quick run through some commodities here for you. So let's focus on Brent crude, still under the $60 a barrel mark in today's trading session. 6% higher though on a year-to-date basis. Not too bad, all things considered. That said, over the long term, OPEC and its allies say they're actually cutting output by far more than initially planned. And that, they hope, might spur a price rally. All else, of course, being equal. Here's what's coming up tonight. Ghana's fantasy coffins are attracting art collectors. We'll have the details on that story next.
Images may appear to be identical, but looks can be deceiving. The difference is not always obvious. It has to be discovered. There are always different sides to a story. We put the focus on the details. To see more, to understand better. CGTN. See the difference.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. And no one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back to the program. Now, male hairdressers may be few and far between, at least in Nigeria. They also admit that it was relatively difficult at first to crack a market traditionally dominated by women. But now they are quite literally making waves. CGTN's Deji Banmus caught up with one Nigerian male hairstylist who's won the hearts of many.
It's Saturday morning and it's already buzzing with activities at Ehi's Hair and Nail Studio. At the center of activities is Ehi's owner of the salon and customers' delight. With his hands, he works magic on all kinds of hair extensions and weaves to suit his customers' taste. Like every child with lofty dreams, he nursed the ambition of becoming a banker. But as the popular saying goes, an apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Growing up, his mom and siblings specialized in braiding hair for women. And it's not surprising to see him venture into the business professionally after graduating from the university.
It's been an amazing journey, and coupled with the fact at the level which I am right now, I won't pick any other job to hair business or making hair.
It's no longer about hairdressing for Ahiz. He's expanded his business to an all-encompassing beauty shop. Despite working in a female-dominated field, this career choice is one that he says he doesn't regret.
It gives me the things that I want in life, like places I never dreamt of or I never thought I would have been to. The hair industry has taken me to that part, and the people I meet daily, they also, I won't trade that for nothing.
This is the look on the face of a satisfied client. As a regular customer, she explains why women now seem to be more drawn to male hairstylists than their female counterparts.
Because men will take their time. They want to get the work completed, not in a rush, but they want to make sure to get the work done early. And Ahiz is someone that takes his time, even if it means him doing one hair in as many hours as it can be. He makes sure he takes his time and gives you the best.
The peculiar nature of the job comes with unique challenges on its own. For his challenges are laced with blessings, and as such, he is thankful for them.
I'm always called on from other places like South Africa, Ghana, Togo, all parts. Even most people send me messages from Canada and US, like they want me to come over and all that. So the demand, that is the only challenges I face right now.
Ahiz is already passing on his knowledge to young and upcoming hairstylists. He's so far trained about 500 and plans to do even more.
I want to get to a level where I would have a school where people come in like 9 to 5 to have a proper training, not just on how to make hair, but also we'll have somebody that can teach them the business aspects.
With constantly evolving lifestyle, the beauty industry in Nigeria remains one of the most lucrative. And what it does mean is that businesses like Ahiz will remain a thriving enterprise for a very long time. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Now, funerals in Ghana are generally a pretty elaborate affair. The coffins of the deceased can be just as extravagant. They're known as fantasy coffins, and they're custom-made creations which are highly sought after, not just by mourners, but also by art collectors. CGTN's Daniela Pearson has more.
72-year-old Pa Joe from Ghana first started making funeral caskets in 1962. But today, he specializes in making fantasy coffins. They are known as Abebu Adekai in the Ga language, which means the receptacle of proverbs.
Any design I create shows the work the deceased was doing while alive. Maybe the person was a pilot, then the coffin for his burial will be an airplane coffin. Once the airplane coffin is displayed at the funeral grounds, everyone will know that the deceased was a pilot. That's why we do it this way, so that everyone at the burial knows what the deceased did with their lives.
Some may label him a carpenter, but Joe has always considered himself an artist who sculpts with wood. He says the coffins are traditionally displayed before the burial to celebrate the life of the departed.
So these kind of things, if you go for a funeral and you see it displayed, you might think it's a joke, but it isn't a joke. It isn't a joke at all because it represents your profession and you must live with the same, hence the reason it will be used to bury you in. So when you go to the funeral, you might think it's a joke, but the deceased is inside this coffin.
Over the years, Joe's caskets have been bought by presidents, exhibited in art galleries around the world, and are regularly photographed. Museums have even commissioned pieces from him, making Pa Joe one of the most renowned coffin makers in the world. Daniela Pearson, CGTN.
One last story for you. Online short video sharing platforms are attracting millions of young people in China, but the expanding elderly segment of the population apparently also becoming active users, both on and off screen. Apparently, they might just be the next growth point for these platforms. CGTN's Victor Ning has more.
He might look like a regular grandpa, but he has over 2 million followers on Douyin, the Chinese version of short video sharing app TikTok. 59-year-old Yang Su, a longtime pianist, was introduced to Douyin by chance and uploaded his first 15-second video 2 years ago. And not without surprise, he went viral almost overnight.
The short video platform has all sorts of content on it, but I think classical piano music is still rare. Plus, being an elderly uploader might have also brought some elements of surprise.
Now Yan also live streams for his fans and has even started teaching an online piano course. Yang says being an internet celebrity has enriched his life.
Being an uploader has greatly changed my life. It has brought more fun to my life and made positive changes to my work as well. Now there are also many people asking me questions about piano online.
China is facing a fast-aging population, but Age Club, a consulting firm focusing on the senior citizens market, says it might actually be an opportunity in disguise.
Short video sharing platforms have been penetrating the elderly population fast since the beginning of this year. As the younger market is getting saturated, the elderly are a new growth point for the platforms. Almost 300 million people over the age of 50 are not online yet. These people will become a new market for the platforms to compete for.
But Duan thinks the seniors market and being an older internet personality come with unique features and requirements.
The elderly might show a longer learning curve when using these video sharing apps. They might also not be able to work as intensively as the young online personalities. For teams behind some of the older online celebrities, they also need to be more creative to differentiate their clients from their younger counterparts.
The aging population might present new business opportunities for the video platforms, but for seniors like Yang, video sharing is more about enjoying their golden years. Victor Ning, CGTN.
Quick run through the currencies as we wrap up the program. The rand still ceding ground to the US dollar in today's trading session. At 1 point, actually, it was down 0.6%. 1538.27 was the number at that point in time. Brings losses since the start of the quarter to 8.8% and counting. We covered Mozambique a little earlier in the restructuring program for the 2023 Eurobond. Price on that, 103.55 cents on the dollar today. The terms of the restructuring: exchange the $727 million note for a $900 million one due in 2028. Will bondholders bite? We'll find out and update you. For now, that's it for this edition of Global Business Africa. As always, we'd like to hear your thoughts on the content you've seen on the program in the last hour. There's several ways to get your thoughts back to us, all of them on your screens right now. I'm Raman Yang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Thank you for your company in the last hour. The World Today is up next from Washington, D.C.